left unsaid. Days that can't be counted by the time till rent. Tomorrow's just another like the one that comes next. The corner of the highway that leads to the job, at the desk by the boss with the elegant watch. The tick of the clock and the tick of the clock mark the moments till the ticking stops.
Today's podcast is with Ethan Kross, who is one of the leading experts on emotional regulation. He is an award-winning professor at the University of Michigan's top-ranked Department of Psychology and its Ross School of Business. He is the director of the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. He wrote the national best-selling book Chatter, and his new book is called Shift, Managing Your Emotions So They Don't Manage You. Enjoy the pod. Ethan Kross, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's a delight to be here, Kelly. Thanks for having me on.
Your new book begins with this harrowing tale of a young couple in the winter of 1943 as they're attempting to escape the Holocaust in what was then Poland. Can you tell us about this couple and how their story came to open your book on emotional regulation?
Yeah, well, the couple was or were. Well, let's say was.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. They were my grandparents, and they lived in many ways idyllic life in Eastern Poland prior to the Nazi invasion, and in a very, brief period of time, their entire world was upended. They witnessed their families and friends being slaughtered. They very, very narrowly escaped that fate themselves. Moved from ghetto to bunkers and forests, and lived homeless for years. And this was a story that I was introduced to primarily from my parents, actually. When I was a little kid, they'd start to tell me about my grandparents, and I had an exceptionally close bond with them. I would go to their house every day after school while my parents were working. They would feed me. I'd do my homework there. And I would constantly ask them, in particular my grandmother. My grandfather never really embraced English as a language, but my grandmother did. And I would ask her, Bubby, tell me what happened in the war. Like, how did you survive? How did you escape? And she would continually deflect those questions. She never wanted to engage them. She would say to me, don't ask these questions. Don't ask why. Why is a crooked letter was a phrase she was particularly fond of. And the only time I heard in detail them speaking about this was once a year. They would organize this Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremony where both they and their fellow survivors would get up at a podium in a local synagogue and just wail and lament what they went through. And I always found that really interesting, that they had these stories that they wouldn't share, except for one day. It was almost like they dosed diving into it, and then they went back to life as usual. And as I got older, I would think about them quite a bit. It played a role in me getting interested in psychology. And one particular question that it has led me to grapple with is whether avoidance is always harmful, or whether there are ways of being flexible with how you approach and avoid difficult things. And I talk about this in my book. I think the answer to that question is approaching and avoiding things can both be useful at particular times. And we tend to just dismiss avoidance as toxic across the board, when in fact, taking some time away and then returning to things has been shown to be useful.
It's hard to know. I had this conversation today. So I was talking to a kind of a new friend, and she came over to the office, and inevitably it's like, do you have kids? And we do, but we lost our daughter to cancer 5 years ago. And, I was very public because my wife and I are both kind of public figures. And I talk about Nora in my keynotes. I always do, because it was a very important part of my life, a very sad, of course, part of my life, but very important. Yes. And you don't know in these situations, like in this, it was just a lovely, honest, like real conversation. There were tears. There was, she wanted to know more. But it's interesting because when you go through something like that, if I just stayed with that all the time, I'd be done. Of course I'd be done.
Yeah.
And so, but also I can't ignore it. So it has been for 5 or so, it's coming on 6 years, a real sort of like this is why the shift idea in your book was so powerful for me, because I feel like when I'm at my best, I am able to take a moment and have some real sadness that I can sit with, and then move to the next thing, which is maybe a nice memory.
That's right. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. These are the kinds of curveballs that we get. And, as a parent, it's just so challenging to even contemplate that. And, one of the messages of shift that really, in my mind, pertains to your story powerfully is that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions for managing our emotions, whether it be anger and anxiety or deep grief. We have these assumptions that there are these one-size-fits-all solutions, and that is not borne out in the data. I think few individuals would disagree if I were to say to them, we all have unique emotional lives. This is not a controversial statement, that the emotional experiences that fill your lives, that your life is quite different from my own. And even my emotional fingerprint is different from my wife's and my kids. That seems to be a very non-controversial point. So if that is true, if we have such uniqueness to how we experience the world and emotionally, why don't we embrace the same kind of uniqueness when it comes to managing our emotional lives? Right? Because the data are showing that is in fact how we function. We've got lots of tools that we can use, different approaches to coping, and different strokes for different folks. And, one of the things that I hope this book does is gives people access to the different tools that exist for shifting their emotions so that they can start figuring out which tools, which approaches work best for them. You said when you're talking about your daughter that, you'd be done if you just sat with that all the time, and you need to take a break. You need to move on to do other things, or maybe other kinds of coping tools, right? That might be very different from someone else. And I don't know any scientist who can take a person and interview them for 10 minutes and say, these are the 6 things you should do, and that will work each time.
Right.
We are not yet there as a field, but what we can do is we can give you the tools. We can educate you about what these tools are and how they work, so you can start to figure that out for yourself.
Yeah. I wonder, this comes up across domains that, I guess it's the brains we were born with, the systems we've inherited, that we want an answer to, is this good or bad? We want things to be one way or another, and they rarely are.
We love to simplify things and put them in boxes. I'm very fond of the Einstein quote, we should make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. If we try to make them too simple, it gets us in trouble. So, one of the things I do in the book is I try to burst some of the myths surrounding shifting. And we just talked about this idea that avoidance is always toxic. It is not. Kelly, I will tell you that I've benefited enormously in my life from embracing the value that avoidance can provide. So I was raised to not avoid, to approach problems head on. Like, you deal with them, you snuff it out as soon as the fire starts to erupt. I've learned that doesn't always work. For example, sometimes I will get into an argument with my wife, usually, well, not usually, always, because of my own fault. I've done something, I've screwed up. And in my attempt to fix it, I sometimes need to take time away. I need to purposely distract myself a couple hours, sometimes even a couple of days, and then I come back. It's much easier to work through the problem. I wield avoidance and approach I'm flexible between the two. I don't just have this decision rule, never avoid. Sometimes it can help. What are some other oversimplifications? We should always strive to be in the moment, be in the now as much as possible. I like to remind people there are some great things that come from not being in the moment. I value greatly my ability to learn from past mistakes. All right. I screw up quite regularly, I think like most of us do. And I try to not repeat the same errors moving forward. That's going back in time. You know what else I love to do, Kelly? I love to fantasize. I love
Yeah.
fantasizing about the future. I think about vacations. I think about great things that might happen to my family, to me, to whoever. And that is motivating. It fills me with joy. It helps me sleep. I do that to go to bed each night. I think I fantasize or savor something positive. That's all mental time travel. I use mental time travel even to work through problems, right? Like you asked me about my grandparents in 1943. When things aren't going really well for me in my life, I jump into my mental time travel machine and I go back in time to 1943 and I spend some time with Bubby and Papa. And I don't have to spend much time with them to recognize that what I'm dealing with right now pales in comparison to what they endured. And there are lots of other examples of how traveling in time can be useful. So I bring it up just to burst this other myth that, we should always be in the moment. No, we can travel in time. We can be flexible. We want to understand how to shift in time, when to go into the future, past, present. And science provides a guide, which is really, I think, pretty cool.
So we talked about this idea of being in the moment. So this is such an improv thing, right? The idea of being fiercely in the moment as an improviser. But when I'm talking to people about that, I have to remind them that like an improv show isn't normally longer than an hour, because you can't sustain that kind of work. And when you take an improv class at Second City, it's 3 hours. That's it. We know that we can't push beyond that. So this idea of like, no, of course you're not going to always be there and you need to rest. And this idea about mental time travel, I think, is hugely important. It's something I do. And I remember Dan Pink's last book on regret was really interesting because it allowed you to sort of use this idea of regret to maybe recognize your values in a certain moment, or that trick of like, how many weekends do I have left with a parent or someone? And then you start to then let that affect your day to day.
There's a time and place for us to be in the moment, like you're describing in improv, when an athlete is on the free throw line with a few seconds left in the game. We want him to be, or her, in the moment. We don't want, the mind wandering to the what ifs and thinking about other things. Like we are such an unbelievable species that we have the ability to strategically wield our attention. So if you think of attention as a mental spotlight, it's like you have this mental spotlight and what you pointed at affects what you're thinking about, right? Very simple. There are no other animals, to my knowledge, that have the ability to strategically wield that spotlight to the degree that we can. That is one of the reasons why we are the number one species on the planet. That is the reason why we have been able to build spaceships and can even talk about things like colonizing Mars. You'll note I am a science fiction geek. It is because we can attend in the moment to a task that's really important. We can go back in time and retrieve information from the past. We can game out how presentations are going to land with someone else. And we could keep doing that. Now, sometimes that spotlight feels like it's not under our control. So what do I mean by that? It gets stuck in the negative future. Oh my God, what if this podcast goes terribly wrong and I spill coffee on myself? Actually happened to me recently. And you get stuck there. Well, one response, okay, teach people how to bring it back to the moment. Focus on their breathing. We could get stuck in the past. Oh my God, I can't believe I said that and did that. Life is over. And you get stuck there, you're ruminating. Bring it back to the present. That's one wonderful solution. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. That doesn't mean you can never focus on the future or past. And it precludes us from harnessing that capacity to actually manage our emotions better. So I gave you like an example of how you can go back in time to help you feel better, to help you shift. You could go forward in time. How are you going to feel about this problem tomorrow, next week, next year, 5 years from now? That's a powerful distancing tool. Makes it clear that whatever adversity we're dealing with is temporary. So what we want to teach people how to do is hone this capacity that we all possess, but that does not come with a user's manual. It's a lot like this, physical apparatus we all possess, i.e. our bodies, right? We have learned how to work our bodies, how to exercise to be fitter, to be healthier, to live longer. You're not born into the world knowing how to do a burpee, right? I mean, maybe no one should ever learn how to do a burpee, but you get the point, right? You learn how to do this. You go to the gym, you're taught, you get exposed to the machines. You get exposed to different ways of stringing together different exercises. We now are at the point where we can do that when it comes to our emotional lives, in terms of shifting our emotions, turning the amplitude on our emotions up or down, lengthening or shortening how long we're in a particular state, so forth and so on. So let's do it. And that's what really jazzes me up about all this work.
You note in the book too, you do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of public speaking. I always get nervous before I do this, and I'm very, very experienced. And I remember Alison Wood Brooks, like a long time ago, gave me the little tip. She says, you just say out loud, I'm excited, rather than I'm nervous. And I use that, and it's sort of like, oh, because you're pushing me towards positive stress. Like I should be a little amped up for the performance I'm about to give, but I also don't want it to overwhelm me. And I hopefully get into that kind of flow state when everything's going well. But I also know that physically, I need to make sure I've had some water. I need to make sure I've moved around in the space. It's like get my body acclimated where I'm going. And it's not like it just happens like magic. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of things like that, people are like, you're either good at it or you're not good at it.
Oh, totally not true. I mean, and I do a lot of public speaking like you. I teach people how to public speak over and over. It's part of my job, right? Part of what we do when I'm training graduate students to become scientists is I'm teaching them not only how to do science, but how to communicate it to others, to people in the field and to the world. And this is a skill that everyone can get good at. And there are tools that you can use to do it. So first of all, do I get some butterflies in my stomach? Yeah, I do. And I actually value them. And that's a reframe that I use that I find really useful. When I register that I'm feeling those kind of butterflies, and you can't see me, it's out of frame, but I'm like in a very strange way pointing to my belly right now. This means that I've got the energy. My mind and body are working in sync to prepare me for this really important function, right? And like, yes, let's do it. Now I'm ready to go. That's an interpretation of what is happening that is adaptive. If you interpret that differently, you think, oh, I got a crap, or, no joke, maybe it was a bad joke, but, like, oh no, my palms are sweating, and what if they see me turning white, and what if I stutter? That can undermine performance really badly. But you could take those same signals and positively interpret them as a chat. Like, this is go time. That works well for me. And there's research which shows that kind of what we call a challenge appraisal of what you're going through can be really good. So you want to think about it in terms of, I can do it rather than I can't do it, which is a threat response.
Can you explain the difference between a positive reframe like that and toxic positivity?
Yes, I can. And so let me also just to orient us here. So we talked about attention shifters, right? And where we point our spotlight can really impact how we feel. And it's not about approach or avoid. It's about being flexible. The conversation just now about public speaking and these reframes, that's about shifting our perspective on things. And that's really important because sometimes our attentional spotlight is fixed on something. You can't look away, right? When I'm backstage and going to speak to 1,000 people, closing my eyes is not going to help matters. So attention isn't really relevant there. But what's so amazing about the human mind is that, all right, well, we can now change the orientation of what we're looking at. We can filter the scene, if you will. And that's where these reframes come into play. So what's the difference between a positive reframe of the sort that we just talked about and toxic positivity? Toxic positivity refers to a phenomenon, a societal trend that really pushes us to live a life free of negative emotion. We want to maximize how positive we feel all the time and just, get rid of all the bad stuff. And while that has, I think, on the surface, some intuitive value, if that's your goal, good luck, because we are not designed, we did not evolve to only experience positive feelings. Furthermore, I would argue it wouldn't be good for you if you only experience positivity and never experience negativity. So I'm a proponent of the belief that all of our emotions are useful. They provide us with really helpful information when they are triggered in the right proportion. So what do I mean by that? Not too big, not too small. They don't last too long or too short. Like there's a sweet spot. Anger, for example, anger alerts me to some injustice that has occurred, and there's something I can do about it to fix the situation. So anger is like the software program loaded up inside me that's compelling me to focus on the issue and confront it. Let's deal with it to try to fix this. Let's take sadness as another example. How on earth could sadness ever be useful? A lot of people struggle to identify its functionality. Well, we experience sadness when we register some challenge to our worldview that we cannot address. We get fired. We're rejected. We lose someone. Like these are changes. We can't fix that in the moment. So what does sadness do? It motivates us to turn inward and introspect, slow down physiologically, and kind of pull away a little bit. In other words, it's an emotion that's motivating us to start doing this difficult cognitive work of life is now different. So let's change the way we're thinking about ourselves and the world. So we take that into account so that we can move forward with this new reality. And what's beautiful about sadness is that I don't know how evolution figured this out, but we're a social species, right? And it can be kind of dangerous to be in our head dealing with really weighty issues alone. So when we experience sadness, we often do the equivalent of fire flares to our community. And we do that in the form of a facial expression that looks something like this. You could see when someone's sad. You can often see it. Of course, you can hide, people can hide this too. But that signal, what it does is it communicates to the people that they should come check up on you. So, toxic positivity is doing away with all that stuff. Toxic positivity is doing away with my precious anxious response before a performance, which I will tell you, Kelly, when I think about the performances in my career that were not the best ones, they're performances when I felt nothing before.
Yeah.
Because I had no anxiety. I never prepared. And I showed up. I kind of winged it. I got through it, but it wasn't something I was savoring after. I mean, have you ever had that experience?
Completely. And I had so I had to give a talk the day after Trump won, and it was to a very diverse crowd, and everyone was sort of like, and I didn't know what I was going to be. I was going to go in without being prepared, but the events led me that day to be like, no, I got to think about what I'm going to do. The best talk I've ever given. And it was, but it was very specific that I didn't think I needed to, and I did, because you're right. If you don't care, you're not going to do your best.
That's right.
And you mentioned, go ahead. No, because I think this ties into the Dennis Rodman story in many ways to me in terms of this. So I'm a Bulls fan. I live in Chicago, huge basketball fan. And for any of us, we remember during one of the championship runs, this is is it the sixth one? It was fifth or sixth. Dennis Rodman,
the later ones, yeah.
He took off and missed a practice. And this is, unheard of. I think almost any other player probably would have been sat for the game, but Phil Jackson didn't do that. And you have a reason why.
Because Phil Jackson recognized that Rodman needed to get some space before coming back from this ultra competitive pressure cooker environment that was the NBA postseason. And, as anyone who watched the NBA back then knows, Rodman beat to his own drum and had a unique way of getting some space. And he had proven himself sufficiently on the court that he had, in some sense, I think, earned that right to know himself and do what he needed to do to come back and crush it. And what I love about that story, besides the color of him, like hanging out with like Hulk Hogan and other things like of that sort, he had a self-awareness to know how to shift in a way that really worked for him. And his coach, Phil Jackson, knew how to allow him to shift. And so like there's an art to when we are leaders of other people, whether it be our kids, people on our team, there's real value that comes from understanding someone else's shifting blueprint so that you could work with them to allow them to skillfully manage their emotions, in a way that makes them most productive. And that's exactly what Jackson was able to do, in collaboration with Rodman. And as I say in the story, he came back and dominated. And so that was a really fun part of the book. I think the subheader of that section was titled "What My Grandmother and Dennis Rodman Have in Common," which would be, I should have provided a picture because, my grandmother is like maybe 4'11" on a good day. So having her, next to Dennis would have been quite a sight. But she did the same thing. She was dosing it, right? She would allow herself to immerse in the emotions once a year, or when she happened to run into someone else, like at the grocery store, who was a survivor and wanted to talk about it. But for the rest of the time, it's back to business. Let's get on with it. And it worked really well for her. Now, that's not a formula for everyone, but it's a formula for some people. And here's another reason why this no one size fits all solutions idea I think is so important. Let's take something like mindfulness. Mindfulness, past 10 or 15 years, has been all the rage. And it's a great tool. It works for a lot of people. There's data behind it, period. But it doesn't work for everyone. And a lot of people who it doesn't work for have the experience of trying it and then thinking to themselves, what's wrong with me? Why isn't this working for me? Other people are swearing by this. When you truly embrace what the science says is how we work, right? That there are these no one size fits all solutions. Meditation, mindfulness don't work for me. No big deal. Because I've got 15 to 20 other things I can do, right? And so that's a game changer in terms of the stress we place on ourselves. Same thing with negative emotions. Like, I don't get down on myself when I get angry or anxious or envious. I recognize that's how human beings are built. And I recognize that those experiences, they are providing me with useful information that I can use to live a better life and be a better person. Now, when I do get down on myself is when I allow those emotions to metastasize, to become much bigger and linger for longer, inappropriately. Then there's some room to take some agency and ownership. But Kelly, it is liberating to not feel bad about myself because I experience anxiety at times or anger at times, because we all do. Sorry,
Steve
you're getting me
here.
worked up. Kelly,
No,
you're
I love
getting me
it.
worked up here.
I want it that way. So Steve Kerr was here on Friday. He came to the show. He always does whenever Golden State was playing the Bulls, killed him. And it's interesting talking to him over the years about Phil as a coach and Pop as a coach and what they've inherited. And I don't know if you've seen that video of him talking to Steph. There's a great thing on YouTube where it's just a series of him like building him up and being like, that thing you were doing, like this, and because he knows what his individual players need. And like Rodman would not have responded to that. And he just wouldn't have. And I think this was such a sea shift in sports coaching, because the generation I grew up in was, I'm going to yell at all you, and that's it. And you're going to, I'm going to treat everyone the same. and they were not getting the best out of their people. And this thing about these coaches in the modern era that I just so admire is this sort of like, all right, it's what you say in the book. Everyone's built differently. So what is it that's going to make you a peak performer? And what's the frame in which I have that conversation?
And in my experience, the best coaches, the best leaders, yeah. Sorry, that was I had it. Now it looks like I don't have a stable internet connection.
Yeah,
let me take it from the top. And Kelly, in my experience, the best leaders, whether it be sports or corporations or academia, are able to do precisely what you just described. Kerr does. They're able to work individually with people to identify how to motivate them, how to help them achieve their goals, and there are different paths to doing it. That is what true leadership is all about, and that is a much more intensive approach to leadership, right? Than applying this one size fits all solution. Like, all right, everyone's got to do this. We're going to put you all in a box. I think you're leaving a lot on the table if you adopt that kind of leadership style.
So in a moment, I'm going to ask you for a yes and story. But before I do that, I'm going to read the title of your chapter 3 and ask you to tell the story behind it. So chapter 3 is titled, What a 1980s Power Ballad Taught Me About Emotion. And this is about sensory shifters.
So I've been listening to music my entire life. I love music. My first tape was MC Hammer, You Can't Touch This, followed by Madonna's Immaculate Collection. I always had a very eclectic set of tastes. No judgment there. But it was only relatively recently that I really realized just how powerful our senses, and in particular music, can be as a shifter. And the experience that did it was I was coaching soccer with my daughter. And is this the one do you want me to tell this one, or do you want me to tell the other one?
Yeah, that one.
So when my youngest daughter was younger, I used to coach her soccer team, and I would look forward to this throughout the entire week. Not because I was one of these like crazy soccer parents, like, you gotta win. It was just so much fun, so different from writing and researching all week. And I loved just seeing her take to the sport. And so I would wake up every Saturday and Sunday morning super excited. And on one Saturday, I'll never forget, like, she's just a downer, she doesn't want to go and play. She's moping around. It's like I have to drag her to give her some breakfast, to get in the car. And, I tried to do everything I could to get her excited, and none of my tricks worked. And so I resigned myself that this is going to be a long morning, a long game. And we get in the car, we start driving over to the field, and just serendipitously, one of my favorite songs comes on the radio. Journey's Don't Stop Believin'. And I don't know about you, but the moment I hear that song, I have to start moving. I get excited. I get happy. And so I start doing that. I'm doing it now. Like I'm, bopping my head. I'm starting to sing it out loud. And I'm doing it a little bit louder for effect, I will admit. And then I look in the rear view mirror. And normally when I do stuff like that, my daughter, cringes with embarrassment, but I see she's actually getting into it. She's singing too and bopping her head. And then we listen to the rest of the song. We pull up to the soccer field, and she is so energized, bolts out of the car, scores seemingly a gajillion goals, like had a great game. And it was just it was a reminder to me of just how powerful music can be for shifting our emotions. And so based largely on that experience, I actually went back into the lab and we started doing research on the power of sensation to impact our emotions. And what we've learned is that sensory experiences, so sight, sound, touch, smell, vision, these are some of the easiest ways to very, very quickly and powerfully shift your emotions, right? You put the right song on, it can amplify you up or it can calm you down. Tasting one kind of food can fill you with joy, another kind of food fill you with dread. Scent, right? You ever brush up against someone smelly on the streets of Chicago? negative reaction. Perfume and cologne, positive. And so our senses are these very powerful shifters, and they burst another myth. Another myth about shifting that we often carry with us is this idea that it's hard to manage your emotions. Manage your emotions is tough. Well, it is sometimes, but not always. And these sensory shifters are a perfect example of how it can be super, super simple. And so I like to remind people that all of your senses are tools waiting to be strategically harnessed. You do not have to wait for Journey to come on the speakers. You can dial it up when you're upset. Like I have a playlist. It has songs on it that can, pump me up or calm me down. And I avail myself of it all the time. And that's just one example. So that's the 1980s power ballad. I owe a lot to Steve Perry and Journey.
My wife and I have been doing a thing. There's a great movie theater called the Music Box in Chicago, and they've got sort of like the twinkly stars in the ceiling, and there's an organist who will play before certain, things. And they've been doing a Howard Hawks retrospective on Saturdays and Sundays, mostly at 11:30. And so we just went and saw Bringing Up Baby with Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, and it was delightful, right? And it was packed, and we have the popcorn. And my wife actually, I remember saying, she's like, I've been loving Comedies Matinees. It's like, I don't know. She goes, I don't know what it is. I'm like, I know what it is. I mean, it's this. There's ritualistic aspects, but there's smells, there's sights. It just feels good to be around all these people laughing at an old, great movie. And especially right now, because the world's tough. This is a tough time. There's a lot going on personally, politically, everywhere. It's like we have to find ways that we can make ourselves feel okay.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more about needing to find ways right now. The world is in a difficult place. And the ways exist, so like that's what kind of fills me with hope, is that there are lots of things that people can start doing right away, immediately, to manage their emotions through these turbulent times. And what I love about all these shifters is that we're not talking about, I don't talk about any medications in the book or anything invasive like that. Not that there's something wrong with that. They help some people, and if they help you, you should continue using them. But the tools that we're talking about here, these are easy, side effect free things that you can do immediately to start getting an edge when it comes to your emotional life. And that's I think something that people should get excited about.
We always end the podcast with a yes and story. Do you have one for us?
I do. So around the time that my last book came out, I was lots of invitations to do podcasts and interviews and meetings. And on the surface, that sounds great, except one has to sleep. And, you say yes to one thing, it's no to something else. And there was one particular invitation that came through that I had no idea who this person was. They had no track record. So many people told me not to do this interview, but I decided to do it anyway. And as a result of that, I met some really fantastic people who have impacted my life positively in a variety of ways, like business partners and dear friends, that just came from that intuition that I should talk to this one person and do this one small interview. And it's a reminder to me that whenever possible, I do try. I think everyone loves to say right now, you should say no to everything. That seems to be the buzz.
Yeah, that is a
piece
buzz.
of advice, right? And I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of social capital that I've built from saying yes, and so I think it's more about balance. Yet again, we are the no one size fits all solutions. Let me ask you, Kelly, where did the yes and come from?
So it's an improv principle, and the exercise when we lead it is you have, the way I do it is I have person A, person B. Person A, you're going to pitch your idea for a reunion. Today's conference or whatever went so great. And person B, you're going to respond to every idea with the words no. And they do that for about a minute. Then we have to switch places, and person B pitches their ideas. Person A says yes, but to every idea. And then finally, in the third leg, everyone says yes, and. And what we're doing is we're talking about in our world at Second City, when we're creating a new show, what we know is we need to create from a space of abundance. We also know that we are quick to shut things down because of judgment of self and judgment of others. So yes and is a philosophy towards abundance. It's an idea of let's get as many ideas and seemingly crazy or bad ideas, because quite frankly, those are the ones that end up being the most novel. But we're human beings, and we're constantly going to go into that judgment space. So the credo is sort of like, pushed into us. And I remember my wife Ann was leading that exercise for an executive education class she was co-teaching with Richard Thaler, who was like, this is a nudge. So immediately he's like, because of behavioral economics, we know people's default position is to say no or do nothing. So literally it's a nudge towards an action, and a positive action and a co-created action. That's the philosophy around yes and.
Got it. Love it. Love it.
The book is called Shift, Managing Your Emotions So They Don't Manage You. Ethan Kross, thank you for coming on the pod.